to another coffee tasting. I'm your host, Aaron Taylor, and today we are trying the Ethiopia Rainshine blend. This blend is a special blend because we have one type of coffee, but it goes through two different processing methods to bring out different flavor notes of the coffee, and then we're putting that back together to get a very complex cup of coffee. It's going to be really good. So, for those of you guys who are joining me for the first time, welcome. It is an honor to have you. And for everyone who is returning, it is an honor to have you back. Thank you so much. If you haven't had a chance to hit that like and subscribe button down below, please do so. That really helps me make more content for this channel and make it that much better for everyone. So, thanks everyone for all your support for helping me build and grow this channel. Today we are trying this Ethiopia Rainshine blend, which is going to be a very, very bright, citrusy, floral cup of coffee, and we're going to get into what makes it so bright and floral after we go ahead and try it. Also, on this channel, we like to brew our coffee in multiple ways so that we can kind of get those different flavor notes from the different brew methods. So that's what's very interesting about this cup of coffee, is not only are we brewing it 3 different ways, but it was also processed 2 different ways. So we have a coffee that's processed 2 different ways, smashed back together, and now we're brewing it 3 different ways. So this is going to be a very interesting cup of coffee in terms of variety of flavors we're going to be getting. Because with the sun-dried coffee, we're going to get a lot of those brighter notes, and then with the washed coffee, we're going to get a lot more of those bitter notes. So when you're doing a pour over and a Chemex, you want to make sure that you let your coffee bloom, and this is very important because if you pour too much water on grinds too quickly, you're forcing all the air to the bottom of the filter, and it creates an air barrier and it slows down your brew process. Letting your coffee bloom is allowing that air to rise to the surface so that you can not have your brew impeded. And that's important because you don't want your brew to slow down, because that's going to impact the flavor. It's going to end up making it too bitter, and you're just not going to enjoy the cup of coffee like you should. So you might have an exceptional cup of coffee, but it might not taste that great because it might have been brewed improperly. So making sure we brew our coffee is very important. And so we like to brew our coffee 3 different ways. That way we get the different flavor notes of the different coffee. So with the pour over, we're going to get a lot of those bright, intense notes. With this one, we're going to get a lot of those bright, floral, citrus notes. And then this one also has subtle spices. And the spice notes does have a tendency to have a little bit of bitterness to it, but those spice notes do have bright citrus qualities. We're going to taste those bright notes on the sides of our tongue. So we have 3 different flavor notes that we're going to really get on the sides of our tongue, from the citrus, the floral, and those spice notes. So this is going to be a very complex cup of coffee when it comes to the citrus flavors on the sides. And then we're going to get a little bit of bitters from the cocoa in the center of our tongue, but it's going to be mainly highlighting those citrus flavors. So with this cup of coffee, I think I'm going to like the French press, just because I am not a big fan of highly acidic coffee, those bright citrusy notes. And so with the French press, we're going to get a little bit more of those bitter spices and the bitter cocoa notes that come forward, really balancing out the cup of coffee, making those bright lemon notes and the lavender notes not so predominant. So with this cup of coffee, it is a small lot coffee, and small lot coffees are very important because you get to learn a little bit about the farmer who grew the coffee. You learn a little bit about the processes that they went through to grow the coffee, and then also you're getting a coffee from a specific region of the world. And that's important because the coffee coming from very specific regions of the world are going to have very distinct flavors that region has to offer, depending on the climate, the moisture in the air, and then what's grown around it is going to impact the flavors, what's going back into the ground, the choice of processing method. So if you grow coffee in a warmer, drier climate, you have the option to do a sun-dried coffee, and when you do sun-dried coffee, you get more citric notes because you're drying that cherry onto the bean. All right, so let's go ahead and taste our pour over. So with the pour over, we're getting more of those citric notes. The paper filter catches a lot of those sediments, but because it is only a single paper filter, we are allowing some of those oils to pass through, and those oils are what's really giving us those bright notes that we're getting. Ooh, wow. So with this cup of coffee, I'm getting intense floral and spice notes right off the bat. And then as the palate starts to clear, the floral notes start to disappear, and we're getting more of those spice notes with a subtle chocolate flavor. So right now we're getting these spice and chocolate as those floral notes start to wash away. It's a very, very pleasant cup of coffee, very smooth. That is good. So we're getting those strong lavender, bright floral flavors at the very beginning, and as they wash away, we are starting to get like that bitter spice and cocoa flavor. And then with that lavender flavor at the very beginning, we are getting those bright, spicy notes too. So it's the lavender spice, and then wash away with a bitter spice and cocoa flavor. Pretty good. So now we're going to try the Chemex. With the Chemex, we are getting a triple paper filter. And so with the triple paper filter, we're just going to be filtering out a lot more of those sediments and a lot more of those oils. So it's going to be a cleaner cup of coffee. And with more of those oils being absorbed in the paper filter, those floral and bright notes aren't going to be as intense as they were on the pour over. And so with that, the bitter notes that we got in the wash, as the palate started to wash away, are going to be still as intense as they were as the pour over. So it's going to give us a more balanced cup of coffee. So on the Chemex, we're definitely not getting those intense lavender flavors at the very beginning. They are really there, but what's really driving this cup of coffee on the Chemex is those intense spice notes. So immediately right off the bat, we're getting those spice flavors, that bright spice. So we're getting a little bit of those citrus notes too, that Meyer lemon. But then as it starts to wash away, we are still left with that subtle bitter spice flavor and those cocoa notes. Really good. I actually prefer this one over the pour over just because I am not a big fan of floral flavors. So with that spice flavor coming forward a little bit more, it's allowing me to enjoy this coffee a little bit more because we're not experiencing those floral flavors. And then we're getting a little bit more of those bitter notes that come forward too. So we're getting a little bit more of those chocolate notes, which is what I do like in my coffee. So we're getting chocolate and spice with a little bit of brightness in the Chemex for the Rainshine blend. All right, now we're going to try the French press. So with the French press, this one we are getting the most amount of sediments and the most amount of oils, and that's because there's no paper filter involved. It's just a metal mesh filter, so it's allowing a lot more to get through, so we're getting much more intense flavors. It's not doesn't necessarily have more caffeine. We do have more servings in the French press than we do on the pour over. So we've got like 2 servings here, a serving and a half here, and 1 serving. So we are using more grinds, but we are portioning out more servings as well per brew. So there's not necessarily more caffeine, but if you do drink a full French press versus a full pour over, you are drinking more coffee, so you will end up drinking more caffeine. Wow, that is really intense. So with the French press, it is a very complex cup of coffee. We're getting a lot of those floral notes, But with this, we're getting those chocolate notes at the very beginning as well. We don't have to wait for the palate to clear to really taste those chocolate notes. So we're getting those floral spice and chocolate notes all together in the initial sip, and it's making for a very complex flavor that's going on. So we're getting those floral spice notes with a subtle chocolate in the center, and it's giving us a very balanced palate right now, but there's a whole lot of flavor going on, and it's really, really good. I really like the chocolate flavor that's going on and those spice notes. Not a big fan of that floral flavor, and that floral flavor is pretty strong. It's coming through pretty strong through the spice notes. So we're getting that strong lavender flavor on this cup of coffee with some subtle spice and then that intense cocoa bitterness. Really, really good. That is excellent. Although my favorite brew method on the Ethiopia Rainshine is the Chemex. Not a lot of the coffees I feature on this channel, I prefer on the Chemex because with the Chemex it ends up being a little bit too light. But with this one, those floral notes really take a back seat, which is what I'm going to be looking for in this cup of coffee. In the French press, those lavender notes really come through, especially as the palate starts to clear away. We're really getting those intense floral notes. So as I'm talking to you right now, what I have flavor note wise on my tongue is those intense floral lavender notes, while with the pour over and the Chemex, we are left over with those cocoa notes. So if you guys like a good like black tea or a good just any kind of good tea, I would definitely go with the French press because you do get that strong lavender flavor and you're going to really taste it. If you like a more balanced bitter cup of coffee with those chocolate notes, I would definitely go with the Chemex. We're getting a much cleaner cup of coffee. And then if you want a lighter cup of coffee, not so intense as the French press, but you are still looking for those floral notes, I would definitely go with the pour over. But my personal preference for this blend is the Chemex because those floral notes are almost non-existent because we're primarily getting those spice and chocolate notes, which is really good. Kind of almost reminds me of like the holiday season because we're getting that chocolate spice. Yeah, so that is the Ethiopia Rainshine. So now we're going to learn a little bit about the Rainshine itself. So the Rainshine is actually two brew methods, or not, sorry, you guys. So the Rainshine blend is two processing methods put into one bag. And so this is something that hasn't been done before, and the owner of the farm wanted to do this because it hadn't been done before. And so what they do is they take sun-dried beans and fully washed beans, and they do the processing method and then they put it into one bag. And so with the sun-dried method, we're getting those floral and spice notes, or sorry, with the floral and lemon Meyer notes. And with the wash method, we're getting those spice notes and that cocoa nib notes. And so with those two different processing methods, they bring out different flavors from the coffee. And then because we're getting those two different flavors, generally if we're taking that one processing method and put into one bag, we would get a coffee with Meyer lemon and lavender, and then another coffee with spice and cocoa. But because we're putting it all into one bag, we're getting this very complex mixture of flavors of Meyer lemon and lavender to make it really bright, and then those spice flavors, and then that cocoa nib. And that spice flavors does give it a little bit of bitterness, but it does attribute to that brightness too. And then the cocoa nib is what's going to give us a lot more of those bitter flavors. So we have three flavors impacting this coffee in terms of brightness and acidity. We have the lavender, Meyer lemon, and the spice notes. And then we have two flavors that are impacting the bitterness. We have those spice notes, which turn bitter after the brightness kind of dies down, and then the cocoa notes. So now we're going to talk a little bit about Ismeal Hassen Aredo. Ismeal Hassen Aredo and his family have owned the farm on the Cayenne Mountain since 2012, and the size of this farm is 500 hectares, and 300 hectares is dedicated to growing coffee. So the 500 hectares of farmland and 300 hectares of it is dedicated to growing coffee. And then Ismeal Hassen Aredo is in charge of the employment of 25 full-time permanent employees that work on the farm year-round, and then he has 300 seasonal farmers that work different times of the year depending on when they're cropping their beans and when the processing needs to happen. They just need a little bit more hands on site to be able to make sure that they can properly take care of the coffee and get it processed and get it out and sell it to the rest of everyone else. Ismeal Hassen Aredo actually competes with the local mine for work. So something that a lot of the workers do in this local area is they work on the mine, and so Ismeal Hassen Aredo has to pay higher wages to incentivize the locals to come back and work on the farm. And so he actually ends up having to pay a little bit more than the average farm owner because he has to compete with that mine. So it's very interesting. And then also another really cool part about this farm on Cayenne Mountain is the fact that they have a nursery that's dedicated to growing acacia trees. And these acacia trees are planted and strategically placed to provide shade, sun-dried cherries. And so when you sun dry them, they're not sitting directly in the sun. They do have some kind of shade so that they don't get too hot and cook. And so they use the acacia trees to provide a somewhat of a shade to protect the beans. So really cool. So they grow and process these beans underneath the shade of the acacia. And so that's a little bit about what we get to learn about the Rainshine blend. And that's actually where the Rainshine comes from, is the rain comes from the wash method and the shine comes from the sun-dried method. And so you put them together and we get the Rainshine blend. And so that is what makes the Rainshine blend so important. Is Ismeal Hassen Aredo has owned the farm since 2012 and is dedicated to supplying jobs to 325 workers, 25 being year-round and 300 of them seasonal workers. And for every cup of coffee that you buy from the Cayenne Mountain or the Rainshine blend, you're helping Ismeal Hassen Aredo provide a sustainable livelihood for himself and his family and for the 325 workers who work on his farm. So thanks everyone for joining me in today's coffee tasting. I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about Ismeal Hassen Aredo and the Rainshine blend that he has to offer and how much work he goes into bringing these two processing methods together to create this very, very complex cup of coffee. So thanks again everyone for joining. If you haven't had a chance to hit that like and subscribe button down below, please hit that like and subscribe button. It really helps me evolve and make this channel that much better. And if you want to tip me for this information, I have a Patreon that allows you guys to support this channel in a much more direct way. There are tiers. With the different tiers, you pretty much donate to this channel a little bit every month. With the tier 1, we're doing $3. You're pretty much paying $3 for your 8 videos a month, and that just really helps me buy the coffees that we are tasting on this channel, and then any extra money is going to help grow this channel, better facilities, better equipment, and maybe eventually one day I'll have some stagehand to help me work behind the camera to make sure that the stream is always running at 100% quality for you guys. So thanks everyone for your support, and we just hit 100 subscribers, so thanks everyone for hitting that subscribe button. Super awesome. I finally hit my 100 milestone. My next milestone is 1,000. When we hit 1,000, you guys, it is going to be amazing. So thanks again for joining, and I hope you guys enjoyed, and I hope your coffee is just as delicious as mine is. If you enjoyed today's coffee tasting, go ahead and hit the link down below. That is going to be a list of videos that I have done in the past. The link above is just a video that YouTube thinks that you might like. Have a great day, you guys.